For those of you who weren't here a little bit earlier, Headmaster Patrick Whalen was explaining how at St. Martin's, they could teach the boys to splint broken limbs and make emergency removals of injured people. What he didn't tell you is they believe in simulating nothing. It's going to be a very interesting school. Can I give you an image from my own childhood? My father, God rest his soul, loved John Denver. And I think his favorite John Denver song was one called An Uncle Named Matthew. And I don't know whether people from Kansas know this song, but it was a very dear part of songs around the homestead, listening to, well, John Denver. We weren't singing. Dad wasn't much of a singer. But can I tell you a little bit, if you don't know it? This is only my second time in Kansas. It's great to be here. I don't know how many times I've said to my students, normally when they were having trouble, do you all realize you're a long way from Kansas? In any case, now I'm actually not a long way from Kansas. And do you know these lines? Growing up a Kansas farm boy, life is mostly having fun. Riding on his daddy's shoulders, on a mule beneath the sun. That little combo there, on a mule beneath the sun. Yes, and joy was just a thing he was raised on. Love, just a way to live and die. Gold, just a Kansas summer wheat field. And blue, a Kansas summer sky. I hope it's that way here. I've always pictured it. May it be so. If it isn't, perhaps it can be again. My opening quotation, a sheet is being passed out for you here, a sheet of quotations. You don't have to have it on hand. I just like, it's the professor in me, I'd like you to have something in your hand, and a couple of quotations in here I'm going to refer to, and several of them I won't. You just have something to take with you. This one is not on there. I'm going to start with, and I realize I might not be standing close enough, just someone do raise your hand if I'm not loud enough. If you haven't had the pleasure of reading Charles Dickens' The Cricket on the Hearth, this is from that great story. You just need to know this much background. The main gentleman, the main man, character, John, they call him the carrier, he's something of a postman. He's married to a beautiful young wife, and he has reason to believe that she's been unfaithful. And the cricket on the hearth has to make a case to him that he's not thinking clearly about his young wife, and this is what the cricket says. The hearth she has how often blessed and brightened, the hearth which, but for her, was only a few stones and bricks and rusty bars, but which has been through her the altar of your home, on which you have nightly sacrificed some petty passion, selfishness, or care, and offered up the homage of a tranquil mind, a trusting nature, and an overflowing heart. So the smoke from this poor chimney has gone upward with a better fragrance than the richest incense that is burned before the richest shrines and all the gaudy temples of this world. Upon your own hearth, in its quiet sanctuary, surrounded by its gentle influences and associations, hear her, hear me. Hear everything that speaks the language of your hearth and home. Hear everything that speaks the language of your hearth and home. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll allow me, I'm going to try to be a cricket on your hearth, and I'd like to speak some of the language of your own hearth and home, if you'll let me try to do that. It's not easy to be a cricket on the hearth in this day and age, and I say this not to be harsh, but what is the hearth in our homes anymore anyway? Again, not to be facetious, but is it the mouse pad of the computer? What functions as the center of the life of our home? That's really going to be a theme for me, and I hope it helps us think more clearly in a concrete and practical way about our homes and what can be actually going on in them. In addressing this, I'm going to try to strike a balance. It's hard to do, living in the age that we live in. I think it's important. I certainly have to try to remind myself, my wife and I together remind each other. It's hard, gosh, is it hard in so many ways to be living in this age, trying to raise children, and you just think, why, Lord? But I think of the words of Gandalf that I never remember, but I certainly got the sense of them. It's not yours to choose the time in which you live. What is given to you is to live well in that time. And as a Christian, actually, to realize it's a gift. It's our gift to live together in this time and to try to reestablish a hearth in our homes. If we're the ones that have to rebuild it, then thank you, Lord, that we have that opportunity, at least to try. Here's my plan. 3 things I'd like to do with you, and I hope not to keep you long. What does it mean to be intentional? So again, title, The Intentional Household. What does it mean to be intentional? A couple of quick thoughts on what is a household anyway, and then I'm going to offer you a few concrete suggestions about what we might want to do if we are going to be intentional about our households. What does it mean to be intentional? Being intentional is what a human person does who really wants something badly. And he knows it's going to take some effort to achieve it. So what is it? What is actually that being intentional? Well, I see 2 fundamental parts. There's something in your intellect, something in your will. First of all, the will. Being intentional means you set your will upon it. Beautiful thing is, this is completely in our power. No one can ever take this from you. If you want this, you set your will on it. In the scholastic language, intention names an act of the will where you set something as an end. And to set it as an end means you are willing to do what it takes to get there. That's what it means to intend. It's a very strong word. I intend to do this. That's not the same thing as just saying I want to do this. I want to go to Europe is one thing. I intend to go there is another. I want to have a certain household life is one thing. I intend to have a certain household life is another. So intention names setting your will, which again is completely in our power on this. But of course, this act of the will requires certain other things to follow upon it. What will the other things be? We don't know when we set our intention there. We don't know all that that means that we'll have to do. And that's where the deliberation comes in. So I'm many ways going to be speaking to parents here. Very glad to see young people. I hope I have a thing to say to young people too. We're thinking particularly here about being intentional. A husband and a wife, what a beautiful thing to be able to look at one another and say, this is what we want together. This more specifically is what we intend to do together. And how are we going to do this? And you spend your days thinking about it and talking about it. This is what primarily comes to my mind when I think of Socrates saying, I spend my days talking about virtue. This, for a husband and wife especially, is what that means. We have to spend our days deliberating. As I often say to my students, pulling out my hair, and I can prove it. There's difficult things that we have before us, but how are we going to do it? We are working together on this. 3 quick steps of what I'm calling deliberating. Study and take counsel. Putting those together, study, including things such as coming to a great conference as this. We're seeking more information. We're seeking to get basic principles. Taking counsel, right there with that. Going to the wise. if we're going to figure out how to do what we intend to do, we're going to have to be willing to make the intellectual effort to see concretely what needs to be done. The next step is to reflect and discuss. Again, this daily, considering, mulling these things over, realizing we made a mistake, we have to start again. Thirdly, make a concrete plan. My main point, ladies and gentlemen, today is going to be, if we're going to be intentional about our household, what is the plan? I'm really going to encourage you to be specific and to be willing to sit down and say, okay, what are we going to do about X and about Y and about Z? And I have a couple of quick suggestions. Obviously, there's so many things that we won't be able to look at, but just to give a few examples. Another quick thing before going on from being intentional is a beautiful passage, one of my favorites, St. Thomas, is from a prologue to a commentary that he wrote on a theological work of Boethius, and he loves to take a short scriptural verse and to give a couple of thoughts on it. He takes a quotation from Sirach, and it is, "Run ahead into your house and gather yourself there." Run ahead into your house and gather yourself there. What he does then is he uses that as an analogy for the contemplative, who in preparation for the contemplative life is going to have to run ahead into the house of his mind and gather himself there. But the really neat thing is, St. Thomas is taking for granted that we have as an analogy the way that parents take possession of their households. Such a beautiful notion. He interprets the phrase, "gather yourself there," as meaning, draw together your whole intention. Draw together your whole intention. I love just even picturing this. Again, it's so exciting that something so clearly in our power. Spouses together. Let's draw together our whole intention and invest our home with it. Quote, "But it's necessary that we ourselves should be fully present there, concentrating in such a way that our aim is not diverted to other matters." There's being intentional. Being present in such a way that we are not diverted to other matters. Here's the first step, ladies and gentlemen. We invest our homes in such a way that we make them already a holy and living place because we have invested them with our intention, with our very lives. A couple of basic principles about household, part 2. I'm going to give you 3 basic principles, all from Aristotle, about the household community. According to Aristotle, the household is a community ordered by nature for everyday life. Just realized that I've sent Dan away with every copy of the handout. I wasn't too smart. Sorry. See, I'm always thinking of you. Okay. Lots of practice as a parent. And so, number 1, quotation 1. The household is the association established by nature for the supply of men's everyday wants. I just find that such a beautiful sentence. The household is the association, you could translate that community, established by nature. Aristotle, when Aristotle says established by nature, of course you know where that comes from. You and I know better than Aristotle did. If something is established in nature, it is precisely a gift from someone who loves us. That household association established by nature for the supply of men's everyday wants. There's so much written into this. This is where nature intends that we live every day. There are certain fundamental human wants there, and that's wants in the rich sense of needs. There's certain fundamental human needs, bodily, psychological, spiritual, that are all tied together, which are by nature's design to be met day in, day out with a small number of people. Isn't this most of all, when a man proposes to a woman, isn't he most of all saying, I want to make one of these communities with you, where no matter what else, day in, day out, you and I are living together, attending to our needs, and then if by God's great generosity, children's, what more could we ask? We get to live together every day in a community that nature clearly has intended precisely unto this. This is where we belong. This is where our children will learn that they belong somewhere, no matter what. I have a quick story for you. Those who heard Clear Creek will forgive me. I will never tire of telling the story. It's because it's given such direction to my thinking about this. Sorry, when I get intense about something, I get emotional too. So I was teaching my son Nicholas, preparing for his first Holy Communion, and so it was one of the things you need to teach your children is about heaven. And how do you teach a child what heaven's going to be like? So I was trying, I'm thinking, what do you say? Well, this is going to be great. There's going to be so many wonderful things there. God's going to fulfill our every need. I mean, you're just thinking, beautiful music. It'd be great to see the angels. I'm going through things, and ladies and gentlemen, I tell you with complete seriousness, and I don't say this because I think it says something extraordinary about our own household. I think it just shows the inside of a child. My son, after I was struggling, saying all these things, turned to me and he said, Daddy, all I know is if you and Mama are there, I'll be happy. If that didn't teach me something, as I was trying to teach my son, it raised a fabulous question. What is heaven, anyway? I'm not saying that that is the most theologically correct answer, but I think it's an appropriate way for a child to think. And I think it does get at the heart of the matter. We belong with certain people that we love very much every day, and that's a household. The second point about the household is what Aristotle calls the chief aim. And here he gives what the end is. Anytime Aristotle's going to tell you what the end of something is, he's telling you the key you need to know to understand what that thing's about. So when he says what the end or aim of the household managers is, or in other words, the household rulers, and he would use that term, which means, of course, the parents, because they do, in love, rule and order through authority, so beautifully and primarily imaged in parents. The very authority of God imaged there, and they are rulers. What are they ruling for? True rule is simply ordering something to its end, and so you must ask what the end is. And what does Aristotle say the end of ruling the household is? So simply, so profoundly. It's that the personal relationships in this community flourish. That the relationship, first of all, between husband and wife flourish. That the relationship between parents and children flourish. This is the end, which means it's the standard by which you judge what goes on in this community. A man, may I say from a man's viewpoint, a man needs to look at his life and ask himself, first of all, how is my relationship with my wife? How are our relationships with our children. If this is not flourishing, what am I doing? Into what am I putting my energy? Now I pause there because I want to say this. I am well aware, we're all well aware, in God's providence, there are some spousal relationships that are not flourishing, and there are some parental relationships with their children that are not flourishing. And there can be more than one reason for that. It is not necessarily then the fault of a particular person there. The thing to focus on when I say we judge ourselves by these relationships, let me be more precise. And because as a man, I should judge myself in this way. Am I doing all that I can that this relationship flourish? Certain things are out of my hands, perhaps, but I absolutely can judge myself by that. Am I doing all that I can that this relationship, laterally between spouses and then between parents and children? Show me a man who stands in a good relationship with his spouse and with his children, and show me a happy man. It's the end by which we judge the entire project. Third point about the household is that there is an art of economia. There's an art of ruling. You know, I don't shy away from the term. Again, I already pointed that out. I think beginning in fatherhood and likewise in motherhood, there's an authority in both. The authority of God is one of the most beautiful things in existence. And it shows up most immediately and directly in the parents who exercise it. There is an art of exercising that authority well. And that's what's called economia. Literally the law of the household. And I just love to point out, of all the things that one might study, among all the practical arts that there are, what is more important than that? And this is the very thing that a husband and wife are to study together, to pray together, to deliberate together on. So just to know that it is there. As in other arts, there will be basic principles of how to achieve the ends through certain kinds of determinate means, but then you always still have to figure out. Arts can be messy things when you get into the concrete. In general, arts are about principles. So the great thing is that those are the very principles that we're bringing up here, and of course the first thing in art to know is the end, and that's to which we've already adverted. Can I just also quickly say this? I am taking an approach here of taking a more natural approach here, and I'm going to be emphasizing things that we can be working on, not so much adverting to the spiritual life. These things have been so well emphasized already in some of the prior lectures, so I just want to make it clear, nothing of what I'm talking about can really be succeeded in without grace. And it is precisely the grace of the sacrament of matrimony that empowers us to do all these things. And if I may be so bold as to make a particular recommendation, spouses can pray together, invoking the grace of the sacrament they've received together. Lord, you've promised us the grace in this sacrament. Help us to enact it now. Now I'm more talking about the guts in a kind of day-to-day way of how that might be done. My final area then, some concrete areas to consider. My basic principle is this: build a hearth. And I mean that to be purposely, I won't use the word ambiguous, I'll say it's purposely analogous. I encourage you to build a hearth. And that might mean using stones and bricks and wood, but it certainly means a lot more than that too. There's one practical thing I'd like to encourage you to take away is a household has to have a hearth. It has to have a heart of it. So rebuilding our households will mean, first of all, rebuilding the hearth. Why was the hearth, as in the cricket on the hearth, why was the hearth the heart of the household? I think it was because it was a place of presence. It's where the family, most of all, lived and lived together. Around that hearth, they were most alive. Why? It seems to me we must ask. If we want to rebuild such a thing, or find something that will function as the hearth in our households, we have to ask ourselves, why? What is it about a hearth that makes it be a hearth? I'd like to suggest the hearth functioned as the hearth as it did in that beautiful quotation there from Cricket on the Hearth, because it was a place, first of all, of work. It was a place of warmth, and it was a place of leisure. All of those are worth much more discussion. I'm going to keep it very brief. But it's certainly, the hearth was, first of all, a place of work. It also was a place of leisure. People needed to be there, and people wanted to be there. How can we repeat that? How can we make that real in our homes? A couple of things I think we should take away from thinking about that hearth. Work has an essential place in human life, so nicely brought out in several prior lectures, especially Professor Fahey. Work has an essential place in human life, and so must especially in the household, that kind of primal community. Having some real shared work is an essential and no, almost lost part of the household. The household should be home to the most human and most satisfying of work. We need to cultivate the home arts again. I realize in saying that still leaves a lot of unanswered questions. Exactly how is it going to be done? Good question. I, for one, though, think we can start with some confidence in saying the home arts, there is something of nature, there is something perennial in what is captured in that notion of the home arts. These are the things that of what it means to be a bodily person, of what it means to be human, require, call out for certain arts that always were associated with the home, and perhaps what was never realized before should be there. That there was more reason for it to be there than they ever would have realized. For the vast majority of history, there was no other possibility, so no thought ever would have been put into it. Well, I guess we better be sewing together around this hearth. But then it came to the point where now we don't need to do these things. And so that and so many other things left the household. And as it were, then there's the ghostly absence. And now we're kind of wringing our hands and we wonder, what does it need? What does it take to have our household come alive? I almost wish, and it's a weird thing to say, that I didn't have to assert what I am to you. I don't think I'm wrong. I'm trying to get it straight. But from everything I see, it's of nature that real work needs to be done. It's what else is there? Another quotation from my son. It just rang in my ears, and it was one time after we castrated a pig together. I don't know if there's one. Well, I was about to get graphic. Never mind. And he just said, "Daddy, I love working with you." These times pass, ladies and gentlemen. These times pass. If you have young children, now's the time. Now's the time. So, different arts work for different relationships in the family. There are certain ones that are especially for fathers and sons. There are certain ones that are especially for mothers and daughters, irrepeatably. Other ones aren't so gender specific. It's just amazing how it just turns out that way. That's part of the intentionality. What I recommend is think about which ones. You can't do them all. I've made the mistake of trying too many. A quick anecdote. I remember one time, very specific, I was walking up from the barn where I got to the point where I was breeding a lot of pigs, and the whole reason that I'd started was I wanted to be able to do this with the children. In many ways it worked, but then at one point I realized I've got too many pigs. I'm too busy. I need to be home with the children, and this isn't something they can all be here doing with me. Very, very simple thing, but I had to adjust. It was, I tried to do too much. You get enthusiastic, well, this is part of. Everyone needs to figure out, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It doesn't have to be agricultural. There are plenty of home arts for the city, for the suburb. Second point that we can learn from the Hearth, physical space matters. We need to make spaces in our home that conduce to the household coming together in work and leisure. Hopefully we'll make those spaces warm in various ways. Whatever those spaces are, I really encourage you, literally, think about the arrangement of the rooms in your house. Think about the furniture. Think about the art. Think about how things are set up in your home. Physical spaces make a difference for the patterns of how we live in them. The great architect, kind of philosopher, Christopher Alexander, makes this clear. He's brilliant in a book called The Pattern Language. He points out various ways you can look at the different rooms in your house, and by setting them up certain ways, you encourage certain patterns of living. This is part of the art, ladies and gentlemen. Think about architecture, interior, exterior, the arrangement of things. It makes a difference, and people will feel it in your house, that you care about them and how they live together. Your children will feel it. Food and eating is crucial. Professor Pierce pointed this out. We don't have to go into this in any detail. We should be intentional about the whole realm of food. Where does our food come from? How, where, and when do we prepare it? How, where, and when do we prepare it? How, where, and when do we eat it? Bear in mind the Hearth principle. Certain activities and certain places will conduce to our living together. To be very concrete, should we be doing more to try to raise some of that food? Again, that's an obvious direction to consider, but it doesn't work for everybody. You don't necessarily have to do that. The fundamental home arts always included the preparation of food. Get the whole family involved. How many mothers do I know that they work so hard in the kitchen and they don't at times maybe it's because it would take so easy for me to say this. Why don't those mothers just, I realized that was a very bad beginning to a sentence. Let me just stop that sentence. Set that one way over there and start again. Would that the children come into the kitchen and realize how their mothers would welcome them in making the meal. And the father too. Perhaps to think about that whole area. Ladies and gentlemen, my final area is to say a couple quick words on technology. I'm not going to beat a dead horse. This has been, though the horse might well be beaten a bit more. couple of quick thoughts on, most of all, be intentional and make a plan. It's very easy for us to oh yeah, the smartphone, yes, that problem, and such and such and such and such. What's our plan of how we're going to deal with it? Because it is a problem. And if it's a problem, then it's going to have to be met with. What this can be handled by this art, having the right end in mind. About any technology, I recommend we ask this question: does it conduce in this household to a deeper life together? Does it conduce in this household to our growing in relationships between spouses? Does it conduce in this household to relationship between parents and children? If the answer to that is not yes, honestly, what I found is sometimes I still have to have some said technology, but in any case, then I'd better be aware of how I'm going to limit it. It's not here because it's going to particularly conduce to those things in any direct way, but nonetheless, in a larger way, it's needed for the broader project. So in that sense, it can belong. But then to be very careful, I speak of myself. Sometimes we've made the decision, okay, well, we have to have those technologies. Then we give ourselves a very wide berth. We're not that careful anymore with really limiting ourselves on them. I know I'm speaking in generalities. This is where I come back to. Let's make a plan. Are there going to be certain age limitations? Are there going to be certain time limitations? Are there going to be certain space limitations? Maybe there'll be certain rooms in this house where certain technologies will never appear. Are there certain technologies, ladies and gentlemen, that we eliminate altogether? It always comes down to particulars here, and I'm sure many of us sharing similar principles can disagree. I might go a little further in the direction of, really, do we have to have that one at all? Maybe we do. Or maybe some people do. And I'm not going to stand in judgment of you. Or in any case, I'm not going to stand in judgment of you if we can assure one another that we're being serious in view of the ends in mind, asking ourselves, how are these technologies in this home building up our life together? Quick final reminder, I don't mean to be unduly in your face, but the habits of us adults is setting the pattern for our children. And very often, we well, no, you can't do that, you can't do that. Are we holding ourselves to the highest standard? And again, I know that means different things for different people. Final thing on technology. The most important part is going to be the positive counterbalance. Because there's no such thing as a no to something that has so many obvious, attractive qualities to it. There's no such thing as saying a no if we're not building in a serious, positive counterforce. The best thing that we can do to help our children not be hankering, pining to be on their phones is to show them something different going on here, now, today. Real work, real recreation, or real walk in the woods. Can I read you a quotation from Sherry Turkle in one of my favorite books on technology called Reclaiming Conversation, The Power of Talk in a Digital Age. Her quotations are numbers 8 through 12 on the handout, and I'm going to read you one of my favorites because it's going to give you a really beautiful image. She really has a way with words. Quotation number 12, if you're interested. Children develop the capacity for solitude in the presence of an attentive other. Consider the silences that fall when you take a young boy on a quiet walk in nature. The child comes to feel increasingly aware of what it is to be alone in nature, supported by being with someone who is introducing him to this experience. So we practice being alone with. Isn't that a gorgeous notion? And if successful, end up with a self peopled by those who have mattered most. Isn't that a great image? Something that's in our power to do. God bless grandparents for their incredible role they can have for taking a grandchild fishing, on a walk in the woods. Those irreplaceable times of presence, with talk, without talk. But without talk, clearly she's saying, helps young people learn just because there's nothing happening right now doesn't mean you're alone. So building in that counter life to give them the strength to not go for the easy things that the world around them is saying are the only things there. In our household, we show them, oh no, there's much more there. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, very quick words to wives and mothers, a very quick word to fathers, and I end with a quotation. When I say this to mothers, in many ways, I say this to my wife, I say this to you. In many ways, you are the living hearth, because you are the living heart. Take heart. Your many efforts are bearing a fruit you will never know in this life, whether with one child or with 10 children. You are the heart. No one can take that from your children. Fathers, let us make it our project, this intentional household. Let's take it as our responsibility. We tend to be abstracted, distracted, distended. We must remind ourselves, first of all, our wives. You know, for a while, I made this mistake, and I openly share this with you. I think, my children need me right now. First of all, my wife needs me right now. Our wife needs our presence. Our children need our presence. They need our attention. Every one of them. Every day, if possible. It might seem impossible, given that often we have to be remote and take care of things out there, which is part of what we have to do. But at least we can remember this. We can always be present by our intention. That's always in our power. And then as much as we can in our body. I'm going to end with a quotation from Pope Benedict XVI, based on how I'm doing right now. I'm not sure I'm going to make it to the end of this, but this quotation is just about my favorite. And I didn't put this on the handout. If you want to look it up, this is from the World Meeting of Families in Milan, June 2012, Pope Benedict XVI. Are you ready for this? A little girl, Kat Tien from Vietnam, at this World Meeting of Families, said, quote, "Hi, Pope. I'm Kat Tien. I come from Vietnam. I am 7 years old, and I'd like to present to you my family." She introduced her family. "I'd really like to know something about your family. And when you were little like me." This is what Pope Benedict XVI said. No notes. This is what he said. Thank you, dear, and your parents. I thank you from my heart. Well, you asked about my memories of my family. About what my memories of my family are like. There would be a lot. I want to say only a few things. Sunday was always the important time for our family. But Sunday already began Saturday evening. Father read the readings to us from a book that was very popular in Germany at that time. The book also included an explanation of the readings. That's how Sunday began. We were already entering into the liturgy in a joyful atmosphere. The next day we went to Mass. My home is very close to Salzburg, so we had a lot of music. Mozart, Schubert, Haydn. And when the Kyrie began, it was as if heaven had opened up. And at home, the big lunch together was naturally important. We also sang a lot. My brother's a great musician. He composed music for all of us already as a young man, and the whole family sang. Dad played the zither and sang. They are unforgettable moments. Then, of course, we took trips together, walking. We were near a forest, and so walking in the forest was very nice. Adventures, games, etc. In a word, we were one heart and one soul, with many shared experiences, even in very hard times, because it was wartime. First there was the dictatorship, then poverty. But this love that we had for each other, this joy even in simple things, was strong. And so we were able to overcome and endure even these things. I think it was very important that even little things gave us joy, because the other person's heart expressed itself in this way. And in this way, we grew up in the certainty that it was good to be a human being, because we saw that God's goodness was reflected in our parents and in us children. And to tell the truth, if I try to imagine a little how paradise will be, I think always of the time of my youth, of my childhood, in the context of confidence, of joy and love. We were happy. And I think that paradise must be something like how it was in my youth. In this sense, I hope to go home, going to the other side of the world. Thank you very much.